Governor Quinn gets ready to reveal his budget, and a big fight over taxes looms. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the show where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. A lot going on in state government. Election is over, but not really, and we move on. We've got three State House reporters here who will provide great expertise today. Scott Reeder is back. He is, in his recent incarnation, managing editor of Illinois State House News, which is a multi-state thing, but he's concentrating, of course, in Illinois. Welcome back, Scott.
Great to be here.
Jamey Dunn is visiting for the first time, and she is visiting bureau chief, Illinois Issues magazine, which means she is the State House person for it for at least several months, which is great. Welcome, Jamey, to your first visit. Kevin McDermott is back, State House bureau chief for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
Bernie.
Welcome, Kevin. Okay, the budget address is coming up. What are we going to hear from Governor Quinn, Kevin, and what does it mean?
Well, if I knew exactly what we were going to hear from Governor Quinn, I would have a much better job than I have. But I think probably what we're going to hear is what we've been hearing for the last year plus, is that Illinois needs a tax increase. The question is whether we're going to hear anything new in terms of his strategy for getting it passed. I mean, that with Governor Quinn, it's never really been a question of what he thinks should happen. He's been very clear about that. The question is, are you going to keep trying to push this in the same manner as it's failed repeatedly over the past year? And the fact that we're in an election year and he's in November going to be trying to get elected to this seat that he was appointed to a year ago, January, is going to complicate things too. I mean, it's not an enviable position to be in when you're in a state that's got a $13 billion deficit and you have to look voters in the eyes and say, I want a tax increase, and I want a tax increase in an election year, and this has failed before. So I'm going to be listening mainly, what's your strategy? Not really what are you asking for, but how are you going to get this by the legislature?
Interesting, because what has Speaker Madigan said? Hasn't he kind of indicated, and he of course runs the House and determines if a bill gets called, that we're not going to call a tax increase this year, or has it been that strong?
It hasn't been that strong, I don't think, but he essentially he doesn't want to do it alone, right?
Yeah, I think he's probably in typical Madigan fashion, he's been very vague.
And he doesn't talk to the press a lot, but when he does, of course, he's one of those people you have to listen to every word as the lawyer that he is.
Yes. But one of the things that he, as Kevin said, is he's been very clear on, he doesn't want to carry all this load himself. It's got to be something that's a bipartisan compromise.
Right, but the Republicans, Tom Cross, the head of the House Republicans, Christine Radogno, head of the Senate Republicans, they're pretty adamant that they don't want to put votes on a tax increase this year, and the at least front runner for governor among the Republicans, Bill Brady, has said consistently no new taxes. So, Jamey, is there a middle ground somebody can reach? And
well, the Republicans are demanding some cuts before they will consider taxes. And one thing that's interesting about Quinn's strategy this session is he is coming right out of the gate with painful cuts. When he introduced his early budget numbers, his budget director did come out with $2 billion in cuts, a lot of it to education, talked about teacher layoffs. So that's sort of new. It took him a while to get around to that last session, and now it's right out of the gate.
That's right. Obviously, that is designed to have some sort of effect to sound the alarm to everybody. I know that the state superintendent of education talked about 13,000 possible cuts across the state in teacher and other positions from school districts.
He did this morning, and actually that would come next fiscal year without cuts. He's saying if we hold the line steady, it will be those many layoffs.
And that's why we're hearing all these local stories across the state about the dire consequences or the dire situation that school districts and the state is in, and obviously the universities are, what, $500 or $600 million behind in payments now.
Well, when you mention a middle ground, I mean, what Jamey said might be significant, because this could be his olive branch to the legislative leaders. Cross and Radogno, I don't think have flat out ruled out any kind of tax increase the way Bill Brady has. I think what they basically said is you have to make cuts first. Lots of cuts before we'll even talk about it. So maybe the less cynical take on what Quinn's doing might be that he really is saying, okay, I'm willing to talk about cuts, and maybe at that point they come together and talk about a tax increase.
And there really is no way to make real substantial cuts without opening the doors to things like education and healthcare. as much as it is really going to upset people hearing these numbers.
Yeah, all the things that we talk about as state government.
Yeah, I would agree, but I also am really skeptical that we'll get the Republican caucuses to sign off on any type of tax increase this year, just for political reasons. I mean, you're going into this November election, and it looks like it could be a good year for Republicans. Typically it is, with an off-year election, with the party that's not in power in the White House does well. And you know, they're especially going to benefit from the Blagojevich factor with the trial. They're also going to benefit from having an incumbent Democratic governor in the election that's calling for raising taxes. And I think, with a political gift like that, I don't think either Radonio or Cross are going to throw that away and try to be statesmen and look at some of the tax issues.
Okay. Well, given the political year that you're discussing and that is before us all, we have seen just in the last few days this Senate Appropriations Committee looking at what would happen to various agencies and things like universities with a 10% cut. This sounds a lot like Bill Brady, who's been the presumptive nominee for governor on the Republican side. He's talked about a need for 10% across the board cuts, which even some of his opponents in the Republican primary said was the wrong thing to do, because you have to be more nuanced than that. But the Democrats on that committee tried to say this isn't really about Bill Brady, it's just about general Republican ideas that we've heard. Jamey, I think you were there. How did this all come off? Does anybody gain advantage by going through this exercise?
Well, what's interesting is the cuts they're proposing are for this fiscal year, so they're for the last quarter of this fiscal year. So in a way,
which ends at the end of
June. So
right.
In a way, it's hard to take it too seriously because they would have to be moving very quickly to make these cuts, and the hearings right now are not going to produce a vote at this point. So it is playing a little bit like political gamesmanship.
Yeah, I think Brady said it's a circus. And, he'll give him the benefit of a doubt, but it seems like a circus.
Well, an election year, particularly this election year where so much is at stake, I think we're going to have a hard time finding any kind of significant legislation that doesn't have a political component to it. And I think you're right. I mean, this is a dog and pony show is what this hearing was.
We've never seen any of those before at the State House.
Brand new thing. Yeah.
I think it's really backfires on the Senate Democrats. I mean, by doing these dog and pony shows, I think it makes Brady a more sympathetic character because it looks like they're picking on him. And also, I think what a lot of readers of newspapers and others walk away from when they read the coverage of these hearings is, Bill Brady won't raise my taxes. And I think it may actually benefit Brady in a way.
Well, I guess it also kind of depends on what interest groups get revved up to say we've got to have, higher taxes, because a critical mass like that has been built in the past in Illinois, although it's almost always had what they call a structured roll call with some members of the minority party coming on if they're in safe districts and giving their votes, which may not happen this year. And we'll just have to see, because you have teachers' unions that have massive numbers of people. They get very politically involved. They can get communities involved. On the other hand, we have a very down economy, and it's one of the worst times there is, so we'll have to see. Higher ed is one of the interesting parts of this, and I did notice in that Senate Appropriations Committee, I was in there just for a little bit and saw Stan Eikenberry, who is back to his old job, at least for a while, as president of the University of Illinois. Glenn Pritchard was there, who's the head of Southern Illinois University. They tried not to get too political about it, but I know Eikenberry said U of I tuition might have to go up. I think it's something over 10% next year just to make up the gap of the state money. And the Republicans on the committee, are demanding, well, this is a bad economy. What would everybody do if their taxes are higher? But what about the higher tuition for those people, the thousands
Which
of
is the whole point of these
universities?
hearings, on the part of the Democrats, is to get this out there and make them understand, if you share that point of view, that there's no good choices. So here's the ramifications if you don't have a tax increase, if you're going to stand firm against that.
Well, I think the key for the Democrats, if they are going to come out on top in this situation, is to emphasize those layoffs and the tuition increase, because the Republicans are arguing against a tax increase due to job creation, and if the Democrats can make the point that these cuts will mean jobs and they will mean people missing out on education possibly, then they really probably will come with a strong point out of this.
Yeah, I know, and we should explain, as we tape the show, Bill Brady continues to have something about a 250 vote lead, and then we are doing this slightly before the State Board of Elections makes its final decision, and then Kirk Dillard, the secondary, the person who came in second, the state senator from Hinsdale, will either stay in, be named the winner if something really funny happens at the State Board of Elections, or concede and let Bill Brady be the candidate. But as Bill Brady is the candidate, he has talked a lot about, we want to bring back the 700,000 jobs that Illinois has lost over the last several years, and that will, generate $2 or $3 billion in new revenue from income tax. Is it realistic to be campaigning on that? I mean, it's good to say, but creation of jobs and getting people in those jobs and getting them to pay taxes, doesn't that take a whole lot longer than the state has to get out of this budget hole?
It's funny. I mean, just the other day, we asked Brady, a bunch of reporters standing around, and he was talking about his long-term plans, which you can debate and which may make sense, but he seems to have problems answering a simple question: how do you pay the schools next year? He was asked that about 5 times. I never heard a straight answer to that question, and he's got the luxury now as the challenger and as part of the minority party to sort of be a flamethrower, but at some point he's going to have to explain, not just the big, broad, big picture view that he's got of how to do this down the road, but how do you pay those bills next year? Because if you drive around up in Chicago, these schools are putting on their billboards how much money they're owed by the state. I mean, this thing is coming down to Main Street now.
A lot of people know. One thing, as Governor Quinn prepares his budget address for next Wednesday, he has put the state budget online, and a lot of people have commented, is this having an effect, or is this just PR?
Just PR.
You think, does it mean
No.
change anything in the, I figure he's got to do something in the speech that shows that he's doing something somebody said, but I don't know what it is.
His staff says he's reading them. We did a story about this last week. His staff says he's reading them, and he's picked out a few. What struck us, we went through and did the math, and almost none of these, other than a couple that are mimicking what some of the main candidates are saying, almost none of these would
Save real money?
Well, when you can lay off the entire state workforce and only solve a third of the problem, literally, that's what that
that's
would
like
do.
$3 billion.
$4 billion, yeah. So that's
Okay.
I'm sure he'll give them a nod. I mean, he loves these
Gotta
sort
do
of
that.
populist ideas, so there'll probably be a few nods, but I don't think anything
I just hope he
substantial.
writes. I just hope he
I did-
writes down the
I was gonna say,
speech, because his State
will
of the
be
State in
in writing
January
this
was
time.
kind of off notes and went on for an hour and a quarter, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see if that populist style gets down to something a little more structured. The other interesting race that's still hanging out there, Scott Lee Cohn was named, or was elected by Democratic primary voters February 2nd to be the nominee for lieutenant governor. He had a past, or do they call it a past, and then ended up pulling out of the race as the pressure built about his past record in court and various things. And the Democrats now have allowed people to just sign up online on illdems.com or org, the state Democratic Party's website, and just fill out a form and say, I want to be lieutenant governor. And they've got like 70 or 80 or 100 people.
all of us signed up before we came.
Not including,
today, yeah.
not including some of the people who were in that race and who still want to be and who are legit candidates. I know, I didn't see Sheila Simon's name on there yet, the daughter of former or late Senator Paul Simon, and former city council person down in Carbondale. I'm not sure if she's still on it. I know she ran for mayor and lost. But she's got her name and actually did a video touting herself. What's going to happen with this? Democrats are scheduled to have a meeting in Springfield, new Democratic State Central Committee on the 15th of March, unless they change that, to at least start the process of picking a lieutenant governor candidate. Is this a good process, and does anybody care? And will it make a difference?
I think it makes very little difference who the lieutenant governor candidate is. I think they always argue on the national level, vice presidential candidates don't really make a difference because people vote for the top of the ticket. I would say even more so on a state level ticket. They're looking at who the gubernatorial candidates are, and there's no official duties for a lieutenant governor.
Well, there's a couple.
Well, there's
the Rural Affairs Council.
Well,
or something.
those aren't constitutional.
Those aren't.
Yeah.
They're in
I
law.
mean, basically, the only constitutional duties a lieutenant governor has is to sit around and wait for the governor to die, quit, or get impeached. I mean, that's about it.
So you make of it what you can. Do we think the Democratic Party then will not get a lot of blame for this whole kind of fiasco of not vetting the candidates who are on the ballot, like Scott Lee Cohn in the primary?
They're lucky it wasn't a higher profile office, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and frankly, those of us in the media also share some of the blame.
Absolutely.
We didn't do a very good job of.
How do you vet 42 candidates, though?
That's true. I mean, but
in a time of dwindling media employment.
That's
but
true.
Anyway. But then Jason Plummer, of course, I think he's still 27. He's the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor. He did get elected, so he's on the ticket. How's that working for the Republicans?
He's been criticized for possibly inflating his resume, which was not really a great thing right out of the gate. And he hasn't appeared really media savvy in the few appearances that he's made so far.
Yeah, he did get kind of tongue-tied in one of those, in a show on
Very
public
much,
TV in Chicago.
yeah.
You know how public TV cameras are, they just never stop looking. No. Anyway, but, well, we'll see. And of course, yeah, as far as his, he did have on his resume that he had worked in a couple of offices in Washington, but he was actually an intern in at least one of those, and I think started as an intern in the other. So that kind of thing, we'll see where that goes. There is some legislation out there. Is Illinois getting closer to actually doing concealed carry with John Cullerton
Concealed
in the
carry
Senate?
is back, yeah.
Because we're one of, what, 2 states that
one
don't
of
allow
2 states
regular
that
citizens to
don't
carry
allow,
guns?
Yeah, and it's and in fact the other state that doesn't allow it is Wisconsin, and they have open carry. You can walk around with a holster hanging outside your clothing. So we really are alone in terms of being a state that doesn't allow its citizens to walk around with guns. We could debate all day, I guess, whether walking around with guns is a good idea or not. But the political pressure here is building, and it wouldn't surprise me if they pass something because you know, the Democrats have so many other distractions right now. The last thing they want to do, I think, is wade into the gun issue, where I think they feel like the tide's turning a little bit on that, and maybe they're not really behind the mainstream on that anymore.
Yeah. So what's it looking like? I mean, we passed concealed carry out of the House. Is that correct?
No, it went through a committee.
Went through a committee in the House.
It's a fairly conservative committee. It actually went through an ag committee, so it's kind of a wait-and-see situation right now.
Okay, because it is funny. It's hard for Illinois, to think of Illinois as really unique in anything, and I guess we have gotten a lot more democratic, and we have, well, with the city of Chicago, for a long time having this ban on the ownership of guns, it certainly made it difficult for concealed carry, but the U.S. Supreme Court just heard a case trying to overturn that ban on guns in Chicago, which would be probably a landmark case. So maybe the tide is turning and Illinois is moving. I'm not advocating one way or another, but certainly it's been a hot issue. Another continual issue for as long as some of us gray-haired guys have been doing this. You're not yet.
Pointing at me,
You should be.
Bernie.
Well, we've been in like the same, we've worked at about 3 different places together at different times in our careers. But legislative scholarships are always a problem because each legislator can give, I think it's the equivalent of 4 full years each year to students to go to state colleges or universities. And then the universities have to eat the cost, and now there are new moves to try to get this taken away. What's the status of this?
House has passed a measure yesterday to abolish the program altogether. The Senate passed a measure to not allow the children of campaign contributors to receive scholarships. It'll be interesting to see if either chamber picks up the other chamber's bill. I mean, I think the leadership got at least what they were hoping for, and getting their members who wanted to be on record as being opposed to the program now on record as opposed to the program.
So it's the old legislative trick. Each house can have their members vote for something good, but if they don't do exactly the same bill, it doesn't become law.
Exactly. I think it is a real problem, though. I mean, I had Kevin Lee, who's an occasional visitor on here, worked on a major investigation for us for about 5 months, looking at every scholarship issued over the last 5 years. And we found hundreds of cases of kids whose parents were contributors suddenly ending up recipients of these scholarships.
Are they big contributors, or are you including the small ones? If you give $25, should that mean that your child cannot get this benefit if your child is the honor student?
Well, if you are wanting your honor student child to get this scholarship, I probably wouldn't give that $25. But I mean, we found cases like, Representative Bolin would be a good example. He gave a 4-year scholarship to the daughter of his largest contributor, who, if I remember right, gave something like $15,000 to his campaign. And it begs the question, if somebody can afford to give that kind of campaign contribution, should the taxpayers be footing the bill to send the daughter to college?
Well, and particularly at a time when the colleges aren't getting the money they're supposed to be getting from the state, and they're struggling, and they're coming and testifying at committees about how they can barely make their expenses, and here the legislature is forcing them to give free tuition to students that are chosen, hand-picked by these guys.
Yeah.
It looks bad. It just
but I
really
have, and there's always these arguments, and as you and I know, Kevin, because Jay Hoffman was one person who gave some scholarships years ago to campaign contributors, and he lost a race for Congress, probably because that bad publicity, or partly because that bad publicity near the end didn't help him at all, and John Shimkus remains in Congress more years later than he said he would serve. But it has also been the case over many years that legislators, particularly from poorer areas, say, I don't want to lose this benefit because some of the kids in my territory don't have some of the benefits other people have and all the scholarships they get. This is a way to make sure that some kids from poor areas, get that college education and can afford it. Are we hearing that argument as well, and do we think that that's a significant thing?
Definitely, and it probably is, but at the same time, the state is not paying for MAP grants right now, which it's hard to justify this.
Yeah, which it's providing but not paying for.
Yes.
Because one of those things that they made sure they would do.
No, it struck me as an odd argument to be making, because, there may be kids in Rushville that benefit from these scholarships, but so are there are also kids that are from Hinsdale that are benefiting from this, because state reps represent every corner of the state, and sure, it helps some poor kids, but it also helps some wealthy kids.
Indeed, indeed. The other big political story that will make Illinois more of a national focus than any of this governor stuff, unless, of course, the state goes bankrupt or something, becomes the real California, but is the United States Senate race. Roland Burris is now, as we recall, filling the seat that was held by President Barack Obama. Alexi Giannoulias was nominated by Democrats, and he's of course the state treasurer, and Congressman Mark Kirk from the North Shore of Chicago, from Highland Park, is the Republican. And Alexi Giannoulias has finally made the media rounds to answer more questions about the bank out of which he came, the Broadway Bank in Chicago that his father began and his brothers run, and he was a part of before he was state treasurer. And he actually said that he expects the bank to fail because he doesn't think they can raise the money to save it. What is the situation here?
Well, it may sound at first like a very strange campaign strategy to go around the state predicting that your family bank is going to fail and will need a bailout, and put you right at the center of this controversy that gets everybody so mad. But he's diffusing this thing now.
And do you think that can work?
I think it can work. I mean, when this bank does fail, whenever that happens, it politically at least is going to be old news, because he's going around here in early March predicting that that's going to happen, and explaining again and again how he wasn't, how he was only peripherally involved in the decisions, which can cut both ways. A lot of people might ask, well, this was your business, how come you were only peripherally involved? He's really on the defensive right now, and I think politically it's probably smart strategy, because there's no good way to spin this. We do it now and get it over with.
Yeah. I actually was mean enough to ask his public relations person in a recent phone call, so has he quit yet? And she was like, absolutely not, and he won't. And maybe that was an overreaction to me, just seeing the first headline that Giannoulias thinks his bank might fail. But yeah, where's this going?
Well, what I found interesting about it is when he ran for state treasurer the first time, I mean, he played up, he's from a small bank, he's just a neighborhood bank, played it up as a family-owned business, all this. And then you look and see what kind of business this bank was doing. It was doing national level real estate investments sort of things.
A lot of commercial.
A lot of commercial stuff. It wasn't really the kind of place where many moms and dads were coming to get a mortgage for their bungalow in Chicago. I mean, it was a very different type of banking operation than I think he kind of presented when he originally ran. Of course, everybody who runs for public office will tell you they grew up in a log cabin and they know hardship. Yes.
Interesting. Mark Kirk would seem to be in the right place at the right time right now, or how's he looking?
It would seem, I have not been following the national race as much, but I think Kevin makes a good point that as far as the banking with Giannoulias, that it could play both ways, and either way, it's either irresponsible banker or a kid that was working for his parents with an inflated title. And
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
that's not going to play
I think
well.
that
That's not going to
Julius
play
right
well
now
either way.
Yeah, Julius right now is like 33.
He
I believe.
looks like a kid who, yeah. Well,
And so,
So,
and so we
and
have
I'm
to
not
see-
saying that's what he was, but that it will be easy for Kirk to make the case for that in his ads, and that neither of those things are going
Yeah,
to
we
be
will.
talked
Now,
about.
Well, I have to
Julius,
say,
yes, go ahead.
The first time I met Alexei, I mistook him for a PAR intern.
Public affairs reporting intern, which, well,
better dressed than most of the PAs.
you know, he.
But he was about 28 at the time, in all
Well,
fairness.
and he also got the endorsement in advertisements of Barack Obama, who was then a United States Senator and a very popular guy. Now, Julius, I noticed that his campaign has asked Mark Kirk to come forward with his tax returns. I don't know if that will happen. It seems like they're trying to take the offense.
Trying to get back on the offense, yeah. I mean, that's typical. I don't. That's not what anybody's going to be talking about for the next week. They're going to be talking about the bank.
The bank. And the state of Illinois, we're not like going bankrupt or anything yet, or how?
Oh, we are.
Yeah. So if they don't, in just a few seconds, if the state of Illinois does not pass a tax increase this year, how much pain is going to be out there?
Oh, Bernie. It depends on whether you're a teacher or a politician. If you're a teacher, you might get laid off. If you're a politician, I guess you make a no new tax pledge and move on.
Well, we'll see how it goes. We're going to have to end it there and wait to watch the governor's speech and hope that it's somewhere under an hour, but we'll find out. I'd like to thank Scott Reeder and Jamey Dunn and Kevin McDermott for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and I'd like to thank you for joining us too. And we'll see you next time on Capitol View.